Good afternoon to you, and thank you so much for finding time to be with me this afternoon, about 3 minutes past 3 p.m. here in Nairobi. Good morning, good evening, depending on where you're tuned in and joining us. The show is Diasporadispatches, and on the show, as I said last week, we changed a bit of the format, and instead of bringing the latest news from across the continent of Africa, which we do on our earlier show, we bring you topical discussions as we look at some of the facts around some of the leading stories from across the continent of Africa. My name is Miriam Ogotu, and it is a pleasure to have you on board. And on this afternoon's conversation, we're going to look at the Democratic Republic of Congo. And our topic this afternoon is what's behind the rising conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo. We've seen a lot of things happening there, and just like I did last week with South Sudan, when we've talked about so much about the revitalized peace agreement of 2018, and a lot of us might not have really understood the context or the content of that. So I took us through some of the things that are contained in the revitalized peace agreement in South Sudan of 2018. So today, I want us to have a look at the background of the crisis, or rather the active conflict in Democratic Republic of Congo. And perhaps once we look at the facts, you'll be able to see what's really behind the rising conflict, a conflict that has refused to go away, a conflict that has continued to intensify, a conflict that has continued to claim a lot of lives and destruction of poverty, and an increase of internally displaced people inside of the DRC, and others moving out of the country and becoming refugees in different countries across Africa and indeed abroad. So thank you so much. So we are going to look at just a bit of a background on where perhaps all this started. We will not go back as way back as during the colonial period, but I do think that a lot of these issues are just pegged on colonial hangovers there. But I'll just like for us to start from 1994. And because that is where there was a renewed conflict that has now continued to assume different facets, and becomes more complicated even to solve the origins of the current violence in the DRC, in the massive refugee crisis and spillover from the 1994 genocide in Rwanda, after the Hutu genociders fled to eastern DRC and formed armed groups opposing Tutsi, and other opportunistic rebel groups arose. Now, the Congolese government was unable to control defeat and the various armed groups, some of which directly threatened populations in neighboring countries, and war eventually broke out. So what you're seeing play out right now in the Democratic Republic of Congo it can be traced back to 1994 genocide in Rwanda, and after some of the people who actively participated in the genocide, the Hutus, moved into, of course, even the Tutsis, but they were the target in that genocide. They moved into the eastern DRC, and from there they formed, they formed groups in there in the DRC opposing the Tutsis, and other opportunistic rebel groups arose from within the refugees that had moved from the Rwanda to the DRC. Okay. Now, from 1998 to 2003, government forces supported by Angola, Namibia, and Zimbabwe fought rebels backed by Rwanda and Uganda in what is known as the Second Congo War. While estimates vary greatly, the death toll may have reached over 3 million people. And despite a peace deal in 2002 and the formation of a transitional government in 2003, ongoing violence perpetrated by armed groups against civilians in the eastern region has continued, largely due to poor governance, weak institutions, and rampant corruption. Like, when you look at these three things, poor governance, weak institutions, and rampant corruption, it is an underlying factor in a lot of African states. When you look at countries that are on the brink of turmoil, or countries that have active conflicts ongoing, you'll find that their governance record is very poor. You'll find that institutions there are very poor, namely the judiciary, and things like the security institutions. They're very poor, and because of that, we do have rampant corruption. So things are able to be done, and because there are no checks and balances, and there's no guardrails in which these institutions or these governments can be held responsible, or can be brought into account. And so that is a thread when you look at a lot of our African countries. I just wanted us to underpin that. Poor governance, weak institutions, and rampant corruption continued. And so because of this kind of situation, it becomes very fertile for conflict to thrive, as we have seen in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And I think even as we have this conversation, we should just have in mind at that time who was the president, Mobutu Sese Seko. Even as we move forward with this conversation now. One of the most prominent rebel groups to emerge in the aftermath of war was known as the March 23 movement, M23 in short as we know it now. And this was made primarily of ethnic Tutsis who were allegedly supported by the Rwandan government. We have heard, even today, recently, and so many times over, President Felix Tshisekedi accusing Rwanda's president, Paul Kagame, of supporting, and the Rwandan government and the Rwandan army, of supporting the M23 rebels. And that is because the M23 rebels are made up of the Tutsis. And it appears there's somebody who is equipping them, who is supporting them, who is sponsoring the activities to fight against the government of the DRC. And you would wonder why. Why is this even possible? And that is because, according to M23, the government of the Democratic Republic of Congo is supporting the FDLR. I think that is the short name of that. And this FDLR is majority Hutu. Okay? So apparently, the government took advantage of the day, took advantage of the situation and the ethnic balkanization, if I may put it that way, in that fight that emanated from Rwanda and came to the Democratic Republic of Congo. And the government of the DRC allegedly is now funding the FDLR to fight against the M23, the FDLR, which is majorly Hutus, to fight against the M23 rebels, which is made up of Tutsis. So that's where the Rwanda's tie allegedly is coming in, as the government of Rwanda is being accused by the government of the Democratic Republic of Congo of supporting the M23. And of course, the M23 rebelled against the Congolese government for supposedly reneging on a peace deal that was signed in 2009. Now, the UN Security Council authorized an offensive brigade under the mandate of the UN Organization Stabilization Mission in the DRC, MONUSCO, to support the DRC state army in its fight against the M23. Now, the Congolese army and the UN peacekeepers defeated the group in 2013, but other armed groups have since emerged. The country's massive resource wealth, estimated to include about 24 trillion US dollars of untapped mineral resources. Just pause and think about it. And if anybody tells you that the DRC could actually finance a lot of our African states, it's no joke. They actually could, if they can realize peace and have proper ways of managing their wealth. It's a wealthy nation, and so it's no wonder, it will never be allowed to know peace, I think, because that is the main factor behind the conflict that we see play out in the DRC outside of the ethnic balkanizations. And so the mineral resources, untapped mineral resources, as I said, they're 24 million US dollars. The mineral trade provides financial means for groups to operate and buy arms. And I was watching a documentary a couple of days ago where it's like every one of these groups, they control a section of the mineral-rich region in the eastern part and northern part of the Democratic Republic of Congo, like Kivu and North Kivu and places like that, as we shall be looking as we continue with the show this afternoon. We're just looking at behind the scenes and perhaps the history that has brought the Democratic Republic of Congo to where it is today, and why this conflict has refused to go away. Instead, we see a renewed, conflict every now and then, despite a heavy presence of the United Nations peacekeeping mission there, the MONUSCO. And the Congolese army and UN, peacekeepers defeated the M23 rebels in 2013, but other armed groups have since emerged. And the United States passed legislation in 2010 to reduce the purchase of conflict minerals and prevent the funding of armed militias, but complex supply chains in the DRC mineral sale business have made it difficult to for the companies that purchase resources from second-hand buyers to obtain certification. And as a result, the multinational companies have stopped buying minerals from the DRC altogether, putting many miners out of work and even driving some to join armed groups to gain a source of livelihood. But that has not deterred a lot of other unauthorized means of getting these minerals and selling them, as I said, as much as countries like the US, which I think has a lot to do with where DRC is today. I think it contributed because the US was part of the scheming, and planning that for the killing of the first Prime Minister, Patrice Lumumba. Go check your history, you'll find that, because they were uncomfortable with other Western powers. They were uncomfortable with Patrice Lumumba was becoming very cozy, I guess, with the Soviet Union, and they're not very happy. They were not very happy, and they thought he's assuming a communist approach as far as politics and the policies of DRC is concerned. So they were not very happy, so they had to take him out by all means necessary, because that would have upset their interest as far as the Democratic Republic of Congo is concerned. And so they went and installed a stooge in the name of Mobutu Sese Seko. Also another long history that I will not get into. So it has the US has everything to do with part of what is happening in the DRC, among other countries like Belgium and France and all that. And so there are a few concerns, like I started there by saying, the weak governance and the prevalence of many armed groups have subjected Congolese civilians to widespread rape, sexual violence, massive human rights violations, and extreme poverty. As we sit here and count the wealth that the DRC has in a tune of 24 trillion US dollars untapped natural resources, it also happens to be one of the poorest countries in the world. Okay, so that is the sad part of it. And the African Union, United Nations, and neighboring countries have struggled to address threats posed by rebel groups and promote sustainable development. Continued violence in the DRC may eventually spill, as you've seen a few times before, into Burundi, Rwanda, and Uganda, countries without long-standing ties, of course, with the US. And Burundi, Rwanda, and Uganda are already being accused of fueling, or at least sponsoring, or being part of that war in the Democratic Republic of Congo. There are allegations to that. And opposition leader, now President Felix Tshisekedi, was declared the winner of the Democratic Republic of Congo's presidential election that happened in late December 2018 and was inaugurated in January 2019. I'm sure we all remember that. And then just, I think in February, he brought the body of his father back to the DRC. He had died in Belgium and was there for 2 years. And he had refused to bury his dad there. Remember, his father was a long-suffering opposition leader during Joseph Kabila's dad's, reign, and so he was very strong-handed as far as opposition was concerned. So he left, and he was in the he was in Belgium. So he died there. So just after his inauguration in January 2019, he brought the body of his father back in February the same year and was buried. Sorry. Now, the transfer of power from former President Joseph Kabila, who ruled for 18 years and had delayed elections multiple times. We saw that, and marked the first peaceful transfer of power in the DRC's history. However, election results have since been questioned, and there are a lot of technical issues. We saw how that played out. And Tshisekedi inherited a number of crises across DRC, including an Ebola outbreak at that time. Sorry, I'll take a cup of tea. Sorry. My throat is a bit irritated this afternoon. I apologize for that. And Tshisekedi inherited a number of crises across the DRC, including the Ebola outbreak in the east and ongoing violence across the country, particularly in the Ituri, Kasai and Kivu regions. More than 100 armed groups, and I think right now the number is about 120, such as the Ugandan Allied Democratic Forces, and that's where Uganda's name is coming in. Because why are Ugandan Allied Democratic Forces inside DRC fighting there, and are believed to operate in the eastern region of the DRC, despite the presence of more than 16,000 UN peacekeepers? That is the number of UN peacekeepers we have in the Democratic Republic of Congo, in that troubled region, 16,000. And that has not stopped the unnecessary deaths of civilians. That has not stopped the rapes. That has not stopped the forceful removal of people from their homes. That has not stopped. So you wonder, what is the UN peace mission really out to achieve in the Democratic Republic of Congo? So it is, I'm not surprised that the people sometimes get annoyed with them. And a few times over, we've seen them now turning their anger and fighting the United Nations Peace Mission. Because why are you here? 16,000 of you. Why are you here? And we still don't have peace. And the irony of it all is a lot of these attacks happen in areas close to where this MONUSCO headquarters is centered. So that is just another interesting fact as far as this war in the conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo is concerned. And despite the presence of more than the 16,000 UN peacekeepers, these groups continue to terrorize communities and control weakly governed areas. So poor governance, I think this is one of the biggest problems we have here in the continent. Poor governance. When you have poor governance as a result of corrupt systems, as a result of weak institutions, then automatically you have poor governance, because there are no checks and balances to bring to account, to hold to account the government of the day. So they just get to do whatever they want to do. And that is just one of the things that has brought the DRC to where it is today. Millions of civilians have been forced to flee the fighting. The United Nations estimates that there are currently 4.5 million internally displaced persons in the DRC and more than 800,000 DRC refugees in other nations. And I can tell you that for free, I see a lot of them here in Nairobi, and when you talk to them, they can't wait for a day when they'll have to go back home, but they know right now it is very, very impossible. So what is the latest conflict in the DR Congo about? Now, for decades, the Democratic Republic of Congo has been the scene of one of the world's longest running conflicts, and we have established but that as much as we have these other factors, but I think the natural minerals are at the center of it all. I touched a bit of the history when Belgium was still there, when Belgium was leaving, and the Democratic Republic of Congo was handed over its independence, and what happened then early in the morning. So I'll not go back to that, and how they viewed Patrice Lumumba and why they could not just let him be the leader of DR, because he really was out there, just like Thomas Sankara of Burkina Faso, and he wanted the Democratic Republic of Congo to be independent, to have a say of its own affairs, but they could not let that happen. So what they did, they went and picked some person out there who could be their gatekeeper in the name of Mobutu Sese Seko, and who helped and aided in the ruining of his country. And it's a lot of history. Now, in the latest iteration, which began again some times back, its army has been fighting, the army of the DRC has been fighting the M23 rebel group, which is waging its most sustained offensive since 2012 and 2013 insurrection, when it seized vast parts of the territory. And by area, the first Central African state is the second largest country on the continent and the 11th largest in the world. So you can imagine. It also has the advantage of having one of the largest land masses in the world, second in Africa, and 11th largest in the world. So the DR is such a huge country. So you can imagine that space, especially in its rich mineral region, has been the battleground for more than 100 for some time now, and more than 100 armed groups, as I've told you. They're now about 120 or more, fighting for control of territory there, or using it as a base to launch attacks into some of its immediate neighbors, including Angola, Burundi, Central African Republic, Rwanda, and Uganda. And consequently, that has led to the death of and displacement of many Congolese citizens. The situation in the DRC has been declared as world's most neglected refugee crisis for a second year running, and even a third. And at least 5 million people are internally displaced, and 1 million more are fleeing abroad. Those are just not figures. We are not counting money. These are people. These are people who have to sleep in the forest. These are people, and when you look at those images, every time they're carrying their mattresses on their head, and children are carrying their stuff, and women and men and all that. It just takes us back to when you look at the images during the Rwandese genocide, and that should disturb all of us in this continent. That should disturb all of us in that, in this continent. So that is what has happened. 5 million people are internally displaced, and 1 million more keep fleeing abroad, and the number of people who have since died keeps just getting more every single day. So currently, the Eastern, just in a nutshell, the Eastern DRC has been plagued by fighting. At least, as I said, there are over 122 rebel groups, according to a recent count by the United Nations, for more than 25 years. Now, the Allied Democratic Forces, ADF, Cooperative for the Development of Congo, CODECO, these are names of militant groups. M23 and the Mai Mai are among the most deadly in North Kivu and Ituri, and 2 mining provinces there bordering Rwanda and Uganda. Do you see how Rwanda and Uganda are coming into? I don't know if I have with me some, I think I probably do, a news item I had earlier on this morning about Uganda now, the reparations that Uganda was ordered to pay to the DRC because of some of the things that it was involved in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And so the DRC had taken Uganda to the International Criminal Court of Justice in the ICC. And there's a ruling that was made earlier in this year that the DRC wanted Uganda to pay it $11 billion in compensation of the war that happened in the 90s. Between 1998 to 2003, Uganda was heavily involved there, and that's why Uganda's name keeps coming up in this conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo. But the ICJ settled for $325 million So initially the DRC wanted Uganda to pay it $11 billion, but the International Court of Justice ordered for $325 million small money compared to what the DRC had wanted. Nevertheless, it's a good amount, and the $325 million payment includes $225 million for damage to persons, harm and all that was caused to the people of the DRC. Except, as I was talking here in the morning, I wondered how much of this money will actually get to the real victims. I wonder. And then $40 million for damage to property that Uganda caused, and then $60 million for damage related to natural resources. So that tells you Uganda was out there doing God knows what as far as the mineral resources in the Democratic Republic of Congo. So this is an indictment. Every time you hear Uganda's name pop up, so this, this should come in mind, because now they have to, this reparation payment, $60 million, part of it is related to natural resources that Uganda was accused of taking there by force. And I think that is a drop in the ocean if really a real, math were to be done on how much Uganda had taken. Like I said, the DR had wanted 11 billion US dollars, but that is what the court ruled, and Uganda paid its first batch this month. They're supposed to pay it between every September from 2022 through to 2026. And so Uganda, I think, paid the first batch. They paid 65 million US dollars this September. So I guess they'll pay another 65 next year and going like that until 2026. So for Uganda to have agreed to this ruling, I'm not saying Uganda is guilty, but you can't pay over something that right? Okay, I'll just leave you to make that conclusion. But I just wanted us to understand why Uganda, Rwanda, and Burundi's name keeps popping up as far as the countries that are supporting some of these militant groups in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And on May 6th, 2021, DRC's President Felix Tshisekedi declared a state of siege following the growing insecurity in the east of the country in both provinces, with military governance appointed. I'm just trying to help us understand the latest and what has been happening there of late. And still the fighting has continued as even camps for displaced people in other civilian areas are being targeted now. And according to a UNHCR statement, 94 people were killed at an internally displaced persons. This is sometimes back last year, a site in Jogu territory in February. Okay, and the UNHCR says more than 72,000 people have been displaced by the fighting in recent weeks. And on March 29th, 8 UN soldiers died in a March 29 helicopter crash in North Kivu. Now, the incident remains unexplained according to a UN statement, but Kinshasa has blamed the M23 for the incident that happened in March this year. The DRC and Rwandan governments are now accusing each other of supporting or endorsing the different armed groups and military provocation. And when you look back at, as I was explaining at the start of the show, the history of M23, because I started by giving us a short history, and then the FDLR. The M23 are Tutsis, and the FDLR are Hutus. Now, these are groups that were formed out of the Rwandan genocide. These are refugees that ran into the DRC, and once they got to the DRC, inside the camps, they started formation of these militant groups to go and start fighting where? In Rwanda. They started regrouping. So that became the genocide. Not the genocide, but the genesis of now this conflict that has continued 25 years plus going inside the DRC. So the FDLR, mainly Hutu, and the government of the Democratic Republic of Congo are being accused of using them to fight the M23, which are the Tutsis, who are allegedly being supported by Rwanda. Okay, good. All right. So the main players in this conflict are Codeco. This is one of the armed groups in Ituri. It is a self-defense militia, essentially composed of people from the Lendu ethnic group. The group has operated since 2013 and masterminded many killings, but its grievances remain unclear. Some don't even know why they're fighting. I guess they just want to fight for the sake of it. Because I know for the M23, they feel like they want their people. You know, inside GRC, they also have Tutsis as part of the communities there, all right? And they also do have Hutus as one of the communities, the indigenous communities there. But because of this war, that has taken a different turn, and even the original Tutsis and Hutus in the DRC are now suffering because they're considered to be enemies of the other side. So it has taken a completely different turn. And so there are those who are fighting, like this group Codeco. You're not very clear what they really want. But for the M23, they wanted to have a stake in the government. And the government of the DRC has not been very keen in that. They wanted some of their fighters to be allowed to be part of the government, to be absorbed in the government, to have a say in what is happening in the government. Okay? So I don't know why they're not asking Paul Kagame, because that's where they're from. A lot of this, of course, now they're being supported by the local communities in the DRC. But I'm thinking, you should go back to where the problem is and say, you know what? Now that our country is peaceful, this is what we want. But I guess Paul Kagame will not tolerate that nonsense. So now the DRC continues to suffer. Okay, and Rwanda moved on. Rwanda was the genesis of all this. Rwanda has since moved on and is very peaceful. Look at that. I'm telling you, that's why we have to be very careful in the continent. Sometimes we feel something is happening in Nigeria, something is happening in Cameroon, something is happening in South Sudan, and because I'm here in Kenya, so I'm not really bothered. We get to inherit a lot of these problems from these countries, and that's why we should worry when especially our neighboring country is having some turmoil, because we get to be part of that whether we like it or not. The price tag of war is quite high. Your country will still get in refugees, which I think there's nothing wrong with that. We should always be open to be our brother's keeper whenever necessary. But if we can avoid some of whatever you're seeing in this continent, like some wars you're seeing fomenting, this DRC war, conflict, if it's not really addressed and arrested in good time, it will be a full-blown, conflict. Right now, it's not fully being addressed. And so, okay. Now, Ituri has also been affected by violence attributed to the ADF rebels, considered the deadliest of the multiple armed groups in the region, and the ADF was founded in Uganda. Now, that's where the Ugandan tie comes in. As I told you, DRC has accused Rwanda, Burundi, and Uganda of fomenting, of sponsoring, of equipping some of these rebel groups that are fighting the government of the Democratic Republic of Congo. So the ADF was founded in Uganda in 1995 before its relocation to the DRC. The Mai Mai are fighters who claim to be protected by the magical properties of water. The group started as a rebellion that broke out in 1964. Now, the March 23, 2009, the Congolese government signed a peace agreement with the pro-Tutsi militia, the M23. The fighters named themselves in reference to this agreement nearly a decade after their disappearance following the 2012-2013 insurrection. The M23 resurfaced last November to attack positions of the Congolese army. They had signed an agreement with the Congolese government, I think, and they feel part of that agreement was not honored, so now they're back in full force fighting the Congolese government, and the Congolese government is failing. Rwanda is the one sponsoring them. And in case you're wondering how Rwanda is involved, in November 2021, the M23 rebels were accused of attacking army positions in the Rushuru territory in eastern DRC. Since then, they have continued attacks against the Congolese army, according to the recent official statement by General Sylvain Kenge Bomusa, spokesperson of the DRC army. The Tutsi-led M23 movement is supported by Rwanda. That's what they've kept saying. And after the Congolese statement, the Rwandan army denied the accusations. It had countered by saying its neighbors had attacked its army. Along with the Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Rwanda, FDLR, the ones I told you, the DRC army is using. So they're called the Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Rwanda, and they're made of Hutus, and they are in there. Now, if you want to liberate Rwanda, but you are in the Democratic Republic of Congo, why don't you go liberate Rwanda inside Rwanda? So they want to liberate Rwanda. That's what they call themselves, the Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Rwanda, but they are centered and operate from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and they're made up of Hutu. And Rwanda, the Democratic Republic of Congo's government has been accused of using them to fight the M23, a militia. Now, this militia, comprising mostly of Hutu fighters, said to have 2 soldiers of the Rwandan Defense Forces were abducted on patrol. That is after the renewed conflict happened, and that was a counter statement by the Congolese when they were accused of supporting the M23. Now, Rwandan President Paul Kagame, a Tutsi, has repeatedly expressed his disappointment at not being included in the military operation against the ADF, that one from Uganda. And is believed to consider Uganda interventions in the DRC as a territorial threat. He has said he is considering various mechanisms to address the security situations in the eastern DRC. So when you look at, let me just read through just a little bit and then perhaps take us back. I know our time is up. Take us back to the that animosity we've been seeing between the borders of Rwanda and Uganda. Remember, the border was closed for over 2 years, okay? For whatever reason, Rwanda was accusing Uganda of supporting some militia group that wants to topple the president. And then Uganda was accusing Rwanda of bringing in spies in Uganda. So it was just accusations and counter-accusations, but all of it had to do with security. But when you read through the story and understand the activities that are happening in the DRC as far as that conflict is concerned, then we can assume actually these other things are they're just going round circles. But this is the main problem, because Rwanda feels that it was left out, and it's supposed to be part of the countries fighting the ADF, which was functions from Uganda. Okay? It's very complicated. And Kagame has also not been on the best term with Uganda's Yoweri Museveni, his former mentor, although that relationship is improving. Maybe, just a little bit. The Ugandan intervention, Angola's president, Lourenço, tried to patch things up there. It hasn't worked perfectly, but it's better now compared to how it was maybe 3 years ago. The Ugandan intervention has also had profound geopolitical implications. A report by the Congo Research Group said the operation disrupted Rwanda and is one of the reasons for the resurgence of the M23 rebellion. Okay. In Kinshasa, hundreds of activists and civil society groups have held anti-Rwanda rallies in Kinshasa, blaming Kigali for instigating conflict in the eastern region for decades, since Hutu genociders first fled Rwanda after the 1994 crisis. So that is a beef that Paul Kagame has been holding against the DRC, saying these people who murdered and maimed and all that, why can't you let them come to the, is it the Kashasha? What are the courts called? Those ones that were set up after the genocide. So, and you know, Paul Kagame goes, as long as your name, you know, appears in the same sentence as the Rwanda's genocide and you're Rwandese, Paul Kagame will go after you. Look at Paul Rusesabagina, the lead person whose story was played out in Hotel Rwanda. He's now serving life. And so however much time it takes, he is committed to bringing accountability in whatever forms he feels is right for him. And so he has not been happy for the fact that he feels some of these Hutus who committed the atrocities against the Tutsis, him being a Tutsi, so you can see it's very personal. Yeah, so he feels they're supposed to be brought to book, and yet the DRC has provided a safe haven for these people to go and regroup, and he always fears that they will come back to cause some insecurity or even topple him. And blaming Kigali, that is Kinshasa, blaming Kigali for instigating conflict in the eastern region for decades, since Hutu genociders first fled Rwanda after the 1994 crisis. So there have been some measures that have been taken, especially by our former president now, Uhuru Kenyatta, who called for the deployment of a regional military force in eastern DRC. That was, I think, maybe 2 months ago. And this was agreed to in the presence of the region's leaders, including Kagame. The DRC has agreed to this in order to re-establish the peace process, but does not want the participation of Rwanda. So they were saying no. But you see, now the DRC is part of the East African community. So if we are forming a strong force to come help you, then I guess all members are eligible. But Rwanda's president, the DRC's president, Felix Tshisekedi, said Rwanda is very much involved in this conflict. You can't send us part of the problem to be part of the solution. We're not doing that. So the DRC has continued to maintain that stand. And of course, we saw protests just after that was announced in the capital, Kinshasa. And people are saying, no, not just Rwanda, but we also don't want Ugandan forces. We also don't want Burundian forces, because these people are involved. And maybe I'll come back and with more information from the aspect of why Burundi is also being mentioned on this conflict, and ahead of Rwanda hosting the Commonwealth Health Government meeting. We saw that in Kigali. There were expectations that Kagame will seek dialogue with Tshisekedi. The DRC president has also called the British Prime Minister, that time Boris Johnson, to intervene in the wake of the UK's controversial asylum deal with Rwanda. So that was that back then, but we've seen that did not happen, and they did not have that dialogue during that time, and so things still stand as it is. The first forces that were supposed to be sent to the DRC, unified forces from the East African community, that has not happened, but we do know there are bilateral agreements between countries. Like I know the DRC had a bilateral agreement with Tanzania, so we have their forces there. The DRC had bilateral agreement with Uganda, so we did have the UDF there. The DRC had bilateral agreement with Kenya, so our KDF are there, but we've not seen where there's been an actualization of having the forces, the unified forces from the East African community going into the DRC and try to help in that conflict. I don't know what they will do if 16,000 United Nations forces are there and they've not been able to achieve much. I don't know what a handful, number of forces from the EAC will be able to achieve if 16,000, think about it, forces have not been successful in bringing peace in the Democratic Republic of Congo. I wonder what the East African forces will achieve. So I'm really waiting to see when they will actually send these forces and how we can perhaps see them help in stabilizing the Democratic Republic of Congo. So I want to thank you so much this afternoon. We were looking at what's behind the rising conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and we started by going down to the origins of the current violence, and of course we can trace it back to the spillover from the 1994 genocide in Rwanda. And as much as Rwanda healed and embarked on a peace building path, DRC still suffers from that. Can you imagine? I want to thank you so much for your time this afternoon. I'll see you tomorrow, God willing. My name is Miriam Ogutu. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.